spatial modules. These spatial modules could be meeting spaces, exhibition spaces, circulation spaces, and how they can be related to a virtual gallery and the interactions to be done inside of that. And students did a combinations of these spaces to create like a virtual world, and then imported into an Unreal Engine to kind of play it as first person in Unreal, and trying to do some analytics based on that. So yeah, that was the brief of the workshop, and some of the students picked up parts of it. So some teams looked specifically at only spatial modules and trying to see what can be displayed, what should be the display types. And another team was looking more at combination of space and how you can navigate the space in a game environment. Yeah, so I will leave it to the teams to take it on from here.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Can you allow me to share?
Yes, please. Well, I mean, I don't know who has in charge.
I think Snow, I think you need to allow that.
Wait a second.
Thank you. Okay, so
Hello.
we're going to start with Ram.
Hello, we are group 2. We are presenting the project under the CBERS. The objective of this project is to design gallery and museum to explore architecture and social interaction in meta. Next page, please, Jenny. As there is no constraint in meta, we consider to design in harsh environments of ocean and under the water. Next page, please. Well, in CBERS, we have presented a virtual arts gallery and virtual museum in this floating station for displaying digital art like NFTs and a large-scale 3D artworks. Next page, please. Next page. In the last 3 days, we have been exploring various special design with different typology to create immersive, next page, please, Jenny, to create immersive, interactive, and socially engaging 3D spaces in CBERS.
So for our design process, we also designed an interior catalog with models that we were going to use for the design process. So here we have a structure, joint, circulation, roof. In the next one, we can see also more structure, floors. And after doing our models for creating our spaces, we did an investigation about NFTs because we are going to design a gallery for the NFT. So in the next page, we can see that there are like a lot of types of NFTs. And we have art, domain names, music, photography, assets from the world's lands and wearables. And the question was how we can showcase the NFTs properly for the NFT that we're going to show in this space. So we designed different layouts of next one, please. We designed different layouts for specific NFTs. For example, the first one we can see is the tree mapping, and it's for lands and wearables. The second is an exhibition, and we can use that for assets for the metaverse, and the other one for sculptures and 3D assets. In the next page, We can also continue to see our prototypes for display the NFTs in different ways. For example, video art, holograms, and photographs. And in the last page, we can also see a pavilion for displaying NFT music, because the music can also be NFT. So when you're there in a social space, you can listen the NFT, and well, obviously the auditorium for conference events.
So for the spaces, we arrange them according to scale. For example, on the left side, there shows how this spatial module differs from the right one. The left module is an amphitheater or an auditorium, which could house 100 to 120 spectators. On the right, we've got 3 modules, one for the 3D NFT units, which could house 6 to 8 spectators, and one for the nature-inspired NFT sculptures, housing 12 spectators, and the bottom one, which is a media space, could house up to 14 to 16 spectators. Next please, Jenny. On this slide, we've got on the left side the tube, which takes the spectator from one space and teleports them to another C universe, and this space could house 50 to 60 spectators. On the right, we've got 3 other modules, the 2D NFT screens, and this space could house like 8 to 10 spectators. Another space, which is the VR and AR space, could house 12 spectators, which is like a simulator with VR Oculus. And then on the bottom, we've got the media space, which could house 6 to 9 spectators. Next please, Jenny. In this slide, we've got on the left the NFT swarm screen, which is always in motion and always changing, so that people could take a glimpse of each of the NFT screens and could house 50 to 60 spectators. On the right, we've got another 3 modules. One is the arcade NFT board, which could house 8 to 10 spectators. Another is the radio screen and could house up to 12 spectators. And the last one is the waterfall exhibition, which could house 6 to 9 spectators. Next please, Jenny. Another spatial module, which is a main element of our main combinational plan, is this space, which houses 3 funnels, each for a specific sea creature. For example, on the right, we've got the whale cube, which could house 1 whale at a time at an exhibition. The middle one, which is the shark cube, and could house up to 5 to 6 sharks at one exhibition time. And the left one is the fish cube, which could house a single fish swarm for an exhibition. This spatial module contains like a set of balconies, which spectators could watch the exhibition from. Next please, Jenny. These are the combinations of our modules. The first one is 2 sets of 2 modules, each connected horizontally and vertically by ramps and by corridors. And on the right, there are 8 modules, 2 sets of 4, which is on the left, and they are also connected with ramps horizontally and vertically. Next please, Jenny. On this slide, we've got the single level combinations, which are arranged radially on the left and like a water droplet on the right, in which on the right you move around this central space and access the spaces on the borders of the water drop or the combination. Next please, Jenny. In this slide, we've got multi-level combinations. The first one was a single level with 5 modules radially combined, and on the middle one, we've got 1 level with 6 modules, and 5 on the borders and 1 in the middle. And on the right side, we've got 2 levels, 5 modules on the borders and 1 sunken module. Next please, Jenny. So this was the total combinations of our spaces. Next please, Jenny. This was the master plan as it took its concept from the underwater coral reefs, and so we took these coral reefs, and it really expressed hierarchy of spaces in which the fate of spaces according to size and scale. Next please, Jenny. These were the elevations showing the levels of our spaces between underwater and over the water level. We've got on this right image, we've got on the left the sea creature space and other spaces that are sunken, and these towers that teleport people from speculating on top of the water and seeing all of the spaces combined together to downwards through the tube. Next please, Jenny.
And after all these combinatorial logics and all the work that we did in the last days, we start passing everything to Unreal. The first iteration in Unreal, we had it on Wednesday, and we had it to write what you told us and what we saw also in Unreal is that it didn't look like really underwater. So now this is the new final like interior models. The first one is in this part. And I'm going to pass this part to Ellie for her to explain more the interior part with the collage spaces.
Yeah, so before passing to the Unreal Engine and the videos that we made, we did some kind of interior design for the NFT showcase. So here in this example, we can see the gallery that we can see that the bubble, because we are inside the water, is another water project. And the giant bubbles that we can see is a showcase for NFT. And in the second one, we can also see a projection of an NFT, a mapping in the next one. And a 3D asset. And in the other one, we can see another example of how to showcase the NFTs. So here, for example, in the middle, we have a crystal that is made for the 3D assets or wearable NFTs. And around it, we have the screen for showcase photographs and video of art. And the last one, and in the last one, we have a mapping of how to showcase the NFTs that are videoed and also interactive. So in this giant screen, you can also interact with the art. And now.
Yeah. Thank you. So with these interior shots, we introduce to Unreal, and this is the visualization that we have. First is the upper visualization. That is, not all of our buildings are underwater. We have parts of the buildings that are up in the water, so we can see them, as we can see in these pictures. This is like the general formation of the buildings. But what we're going to do is to go down the water, because that was the starting point for everything and the starting point for the Unreal itself. And this is the underwater gallery that we created. This is the main entrance spot of the underwater gallery. We have here some benches. We have here the lighting effects. So we can simulate that we are underwater. As we dip down, the surroundings start to be more dark and only have this little coloring because it's underwater. We have these little like coral reefs here. This is our auditorium. You can see the fishes in here. It's more darker than the upper part. This is the auditorium itself. And in the upper part, we have this entrance, and we are going to start just moving around the space. And we have different spaces as we just showcased. This one is for wearables. So we have this type of a wearable that you can see the wearable in the NFT gallery, and also if you like to combine it with the e-commerce, it can be combined. So you can buy this dress for your avatar if you want. Here we have the projections of the screens in this part. So each people can be looking to something different in the NFT gallery. Here you can see that it's a multi-layer system. So we can have different spaces, a total different combinatorial logic. And all the atmosphere has to be set for this to be like underwater and to be feel like it's underwater. So it has the architectural element, but it also has this metaverse surreal element that we can do in the metaverse and try to pursue it to the best. This is the other part where we are adding the wearables. Here we are going to have AR effects too. And we have here the wearables so the people just can go and watch the wearable, buy the wearable. And this is another space that we have, that is the Waterfall Space. We have a screen surrounding the space, and we have, again, a wearable. This is like a huge space. It's not the small one. So we have different scales of spaces inside our metaverse. Here you can see how the space is looking. Here is our garden for NFT sculptures. We can have different NFT sculptures from different artists. And people can go around the sculpture, see the scale of the sculptures if they like it, if they want to, in the future, pursue to buy some of these sculptures. Well, this is, again, the auditorium. Here you can see that as we are underwater, we have these bubble effects, so we can have the sensation that we're truly underwater. We're going to see that more in the video. This is like a zoom to the garden space with a fish floating in that space. And here you can see how this is looking. We have the railings, we have the whole space. And this is like the entrance part. And let me show the video, 1 second. So this is the unveiling video. We have different spaces, and as you can see, it is a multi-layer system. So we have here the wearables and the exhibition that we just saw in the rendering, but now with really animation and real. And what is interesting for us, and what it starts like, we start asking a lot of questions when we start doing the visualization, that we really want to be inside it, like deep down and going inside these spaces, because each of the spaces has a unique quality. Even because of the NFT that they are displaying, and even because of the lighting effects that they are having. Some has like a screen, some doesn't have a screen, some have this fishing going around. We are trying to create the atmosphere to know that we can do this type of architecture, but it can only be done in the metaverse for now. And yeah, that is the bubble that I was talking about. Here is the NFT garden. This is the radio screen for 2D NFTs. It's a totally different lighting because we're displaying each individual NFT. This is the arcade. And this is the media space with the central focal point. And as you can see here, we have different layers, and we have a lot of depth because of the layers. So the space can be feel and sensed in a different way inside the metaverse. It's not plain. We can just feel that we are inside it. And this is the deepest space, is the NFT auditorium, and the NFT amphitheater auditorium. It can be used for, well, it's the screening of NFTs. It can be used for TED Talks. We were thinking about using it for TED Talks, or just putting a big centerpiece of art and we're going around and watching it. And that's all. Thank you so much. We are the architecture for the Metaverse Group 2 under the Seaverse group. And yeah, that's all.
So from my side, congratulations. Super impressive. When I saw it 2 days ago, it was already quite impressive. within that short time, you've been very, very productive, and the visuals are quite compelling. It's quite inviting, very immersive, of course, very characterful, beautiful, and also you picked up some of the suggestions and you've gone back and really looked at types of NFTs and how they might be displayed, engaged with. You even made a diagram of that 10,000, the swarm of 10,000 JPEGs which you're swirling around and haven't been animated, but I do like. I mean, when I first saw these tubes where you said here's the whale, here's the swarm of fishes, I said, well, no, these fishes need to be swarming around. Why do you need to look at them as in this tube? But in the end, you had the fish swarming around, and I suspect that's an artwork or NFT or something. So it's really a pleasure to observe, and the productivity of working like this, and you've took up the challenge of developing a more complex organization, not just a radial array on a single surface. You exploited. But I also think it was new, which I really like. You exploited you used that undersea thing would have just been atmospheric tuning of the whole thing, but you now use there's this water surface which distinguishes above sea, below water. Although I think that at the moment it doesn't have much meaning. So I think it's a strong thing where you also quite clearly everything is of a different character. A continuous reminder, now you're underwater and here you're over water. It's very different with respect to the light and with a continuous, let's say, bubbling and color scheme. But you haven't given meaning to this. I mean, the idea of undersea worlds would just be sort of more of a spectacle thing initially, an atmospheric thing. But with that, I think with distinctions, you always introduce order. So you would have probably come up with, for instance, what's below water, what's above water. There's something significantly different, the difference that makes a difference with respect to what you're displaying. Maybe it's all the commercial activity above water, or the purely engaging below. It's not that not that you've did that, but I'm saying that will be the meaning of that. Always working with distinctions rather than with so otherwise the undersea water thing would have been relatively meaningless. The distinction gives meaning, but you haven't made it explicit. So I do find it interesting. But there's also the light dark distinction which comes along that. So there's redundant reminders, and it would be interesting. How do you cross that threshold, and what does it mean for you? With this bifurcation of the space and so on and so forth. Yeah, I thought it's really, really exciting. I also thought you picked it up. I mean, that experiencing. NFT artworks. You could just scroll on your laptop at home as 2D if it was about individual engagement. So these are social engagements. You try to show that you can look at these things together in small groups with friends, or you see it in the public, so you also can see where's the crowd's moving, what's going on. So it helps you to select what to look at. So I think that's nice to animate a bit the crowds and distinguish that these are always social engagement with works of art. Maybe except for the variable, I quite like also that space. I mean, it wasn't clear what the screens are there for, but maybe that's where you can see yourselves from the back, from the top. So there's this kind of Prada thing where you had these kind of special changing room, and you'll see yourself wearing this and flicking through versions of the wearable and so on. So that deserves elaboration, but it's nice to home in on the particulars of some of those NFTs, and they're not only artworks. You've gone beyond NFT art, you've gone into NFT, 3D assets, etc., wearables. I did quite like that quite a bit. So really quite happy and inspired. So since we're working on metaverses, so I'm quite happy that you're contributing to discourse and you generate ideas you can run with, we can run with, anybody who's publicly online streaming can run with your ideas, which is, I think, is generous and good contribution. So I had one question that water ball I didn't fully understand. When we first looked at the stills of the exhibition, we had this beautifully rendered sphere of water, but I didn't understand whether that itself is NFT, or an NFT is projected on us, or NFTs are inside this. It was a bit mysterious. And the waterfall also, I didn't fully understand how you have a waterfall underwater, but what was the waterfall the piece itself, or was the waterfall a way of displaying pieces? But that's nice when, you know, in this kind of quick process, you have, maybe you come up with stuff you don't fully rationalize, and maybe they're inspirational. But if you have an explanation, please let me know.
Maybe I can just chip in something. First of all, congratulations on all the hard work. That was an amazing amount of work in the time, and what, 5-6 days or something, amazing. But I was just left with some kind of more general sort of questions. I think, you know, what I find intriguing is the way in this so-called metaverse world that somehow the logics of our material existence in this world, as it were, are replicated. You know, and I wonder why that is exactly. I mean, even the notion of buying property doesn't seem to make sense when you're online, as it were. And I guess from experiences of doing a number of space architecture studios in the past, I'm always curious by the way that people think that in space you have to have gravity, you have to have a sort of, you know, all these things get replicated. And at some level, I think, you know, maybe you're kind of holding out the aspiration that possibly this is a design for a building that could get built. Maybe that's behind all this, but it strikes me that actually we needn't be constrained by these logics at all. You know, gravity or any of those things. That there is a possibility of really opening up to a different domain. I don't know how you do it because what are the constraints you're operating within? But I'm just wondering whether you couldn't have, you know, really pushed this a bit further in terms of the imagination. I mean, the fishes, okay, fishes, but what else could they be? And I'm just thinking about this extraordinary burst of energy I've seen the last few days in terms of Midjourney. I mean, even Gilles Retzin's kind of raving about it, right? I mean, so what would happen if you did what Nicolo Casas is doing and going to Midjourney and just kind of blowing apart all the conventions of what we understood architecture to be in the past, because you can do it here. There is no financial constraint as such in those things, and why not? The other thought I had, which was, this goes back in 1999 when years ago, I had a student who did it very well, doing an online shopping experience, but he got it completely wrong. He assumed that online shopping would be something like this, a kind of three-dimensional kind of space of operations. In fact, it couldn't be that because of the bandwidth and all those other concerns and so on. And if you go online, look at Amazon, you see what it is. Actually, it's the way that you can use a two-dimensional environment to, I don't know, get on board sort of people's recommendations, reviews and so on, and all that information. So I'm just wondering to what extent one can break free of a typical kind of terrestrial environment and use this space of opportunities to really forge a new way of thinking and a new logic entirely. So let me just float that out there as a provocation.
I mean, let me just, maybe I can answer to this very briefly. Because we heard this many times, and so I've been more promoting the sense of realism. There was a number of reasons for that. One is let's say, yes, I think gravity plays still an important role in, even in the metaverse, in terms of ordering, and also having a ground surface to plot and play against. Even if you can be more three-dimensional, things float and more dynamic. Imagine, but because we're also living off the analogy of architecture and space and relying on our intuitive knowledge of how to orient and find and distinguish situation spaces and navigating. And if everything was flying around in a gravity-less galaxy, also how do you engage with people? How do you talk? Can you talk with somebody when you free floating in space? Do you know what's going on? Where's what? So I think there will be a gradual process of emancipation and discovering more of these degrees of freedom. And currently, all the metaverses are very highly kind of modeled on physical cities, spaces, architectures. And in this one, they've already kind of shifted out by saying this underwater. I mean, maybe the people could have also floated a bit more, but I think gravity helps. Discussing also that even column structure, pin things down, and you more orient which is foreground, background. So there's lots of reasons why this is the case. But I also, I'm inviting, obviously, playing against that to some extent. And one could also, let's say, when it's really interesting in a studio like this to see if somebody was gone totally off that, and could we still kind of follow and understand what was going on? Can we still engage? And I can say one thing also, what I saw in Confermatic, and because we obviously working with this quite immediately into real world, real client, real social functionality conditions. That's why we kind of like actually something which is more patterned after something which can be easily grasped. But in Confermatic, for instance, in the conferencing situation, if you build a crowd around a stage and screen, they actually started to allow the audience to float, so that you get more three-dimensional, you get more viewing space onto the stage than being stacked on a flat surface. That makes sense, and you can still see, but you still have the setup of an auditorium, a stage, a screen, some kind of framing, but and it's a bit like an auditorium where the seats rise up, but in this case, you can yourself self-order into a floating, let's say, audience form and more view lines, etc. So I think these kind of things will emerge. I'm quite happy. But for instance, you questioned the idea of buying property. No, of course, that's a big part of Web3 and the Internet of Value, which is both, not only the immersive internet where you're talking about, there is something like, digital property, of course, when you have if you want to be part of a particular metaverse, picture network effects and popularity, and there's, location, positionality, and staking your position. But it could also be that these properties might not be so super stable, but they might be roaming a little bit, but you still have, you have to stake a claim. I mean, that's part of what actually finances this. These investments. So I do actually quite like that you also the team is looking at commercial transactions. I mean, it was initially part of, I guess, not part of the brief, but you expanded the brief to what's kind of germane in the metaverse, that you have a lot of galleries in the metaverse, but they're all sales galleries. They're not just museums.
Okay.
So, and by the way, there are quite a bit of financial constraints also in terms of there's artificial rarity, but also in terms of what we're discovering. You're saying you can do a lot, you can do everything, and it costs nothing. That's not quite true. A lot of this is quite costly to generate the geometry, the polygon counts. I mean, polygon counts are a precious resource when it comes to server space and refreshment rates and how many audiences can actually participate. All of these constraints are interesting. So we have a whole new engineering stack, which we need to kind of grapple with, and there's an economy to these constraints, and it's useful to reflect them. That's another thing we need to remember. I mean, because I'm conscious of these things, but because this is not only an academic project, it's something which feeds directly into real life projects.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess what my point would be, when you've got infinite space as you have in the metaverse, and you don't have the same logic of, in London, for example, property is based on the location, propinquity, and all those things. This could be anything. So I'm still struggling.
No, I absolutely disagree with that, because you want to be close to this co-location synergy game. You want to be close to the central public space. You want to be close to other institutions you want to compete with or relate with. And that means this is a scarce resource, and you could expand outside, but then you would be disconnected, or you wouldn't have spatialized connection. You can kind of inverted commas teleport, but then you're back into a non-spatialized navigation and clustering just through links and hyperlinks. So this definitely is a scarce resource, and you could imagine a metaverse where they usually fix it from the day one. That's kind of maybe arbitrary, and they could have made it smaller first, because that vastness also maybe says, well, there's too many, I'm not buying. So but you need to have a schedule, a rollout. It's a bit like cryptocurrency having an inflation schedule, or you may let it naturally happen. I think naturally it will happen that there's kind of relative rarity if you want to be part of a hot cluster, a hot shot metaverse, and you want to be right in the center of it.
Okay, may I make some comments? I think this year in Digital Futures in the Asian Pacific, we have 3 teams, and they make the similar research on the metaverse and the design on that. And also last term in my studio, we also put forward the topic to the metaverse space design. I think it's quite interesting, especially I think what is after artificial intelligence architecture, the NFT and the metaverse virtual space research is extremely popular as a thematic topic and in the studio, I think around the world. So I think it's very meaningful for this workshop I think as a research project, it's very interesting. I would like to address some comments. I think what's the essential knowledge or the contribution of this workshop to the metaverse research? I think because you mentioned the topic is NFT museum, right? Is a topic. So I think the most interesting perspective is actually the metaverse is not 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional. It's actually it's kind of a multi-dimensional experience. So essential part for this distributed autonomous organization is I think the different layers of the information you need to design a new infrastructure, how to represent. It's like an infrastructure system in the NFT. So I think the representation of that and how to stacking all this kind of the storage of the data and how to layer this kind of different package or different stacking of this kind of information or data, and how to searching for that, storage for that, and the experience index for that. So that's very similar to design a physical library, like all memory library in the States. It's like he actually designed a circulation by alphabet. So that's a quite 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional index system for this kind of library data. But actually in the metaverse, the data stacking is quite different. I think the people need to searching for different data by their different community, by the different small groups of people, by different topic, by different discipline. Maybe the NFT can give an index possibility to different community. So I think that's the infrastructure or initial logic of what is NFT. So I think the design for this system is most important, how to represent such kind of initial logic for different people to searching the data, experience the data.
I mean, Philip, I think that you're onto something very interesting here. By the way, I have to invite you to our January jury. I didn't know that you're so deeply in the metaverse with your own students. So you definitely I would be very curious to get you in. But I think with respect to you're talking is quite different from what the topic was here, but I think is highly relevant and interesting. Basically, in a way, what you're talking about is here's just selected a small, it's a curated cluster of a few samples you want to show. It's not making the universe of NFTs across its various categories and history and depth and network connections navigable spatialization through spatialization. What you're talking about is a different project, which is actually thinking we should remember that the metaverse as library effectively, or let's say as navigating the whole universe of NFTs. And that's the way the project was posed, and we should explicitly remember it, by the early cyberspace theorists. They actually thought the cyberspace not so much, and that was maybe coming out of some of the idea of cyberspace and neuromance, etc. Cyberspace wasn't so much the space of immersive interaction, engagement, first-person experiences, and social interaction. It was more kind of a 3D data navigation. So the references were the visualization of information, of statistics, of finding, like you say, finding things in the lab. These were libraries, and there's some fascinating work. It's actually, you can look that up in this book, Cyberspace, was published in the late 80s. Or was it 91, whenever it was, I forgot, by Michael Benedict. And they made these early cyberspace sketches. They were actually always these strange 3D arrays and matrices of life. And I think it's relevant. How would you do that actually? How would you? And that's more like the it's more of a kind of information retrieval system in 3D rather than encountering, but maybe you also encounter people. But it's an interesting aspect of the metaverse, which isn't what most metaverses now aspire to. But I do find it interesting you bring it in, because that was the early vision of cyberspace, and maybe there's a role to some extent of it. So
I think
it will be
maybe
a different project. Design me a space where I can find every single NFT, millions of NFTs structured, clustered, arrayed.
I think the future NFT museum actually should base on different community. The topic is from the C verse, as you mentioned. I think what's the initial logic in the sea actually is quite different to the continent, right? It's actually without gravity, because the floating is anti-gravity in the sea. So
yeah, I think they should have used that more, where these things are, you know,
yeah, maybe
coming to surface, sinking back below surface, etc.
Yeah,
I think that kind of ties in with like what Neil was saying about Amazon, right? Like that when it comes to NFTs, there is that aspect of index and which of the NFTs are currently on show, let's say, like, and the idea of currentness is very much it's no longer individual. It's like who is in the museum at that point, right? Like, and the museum could change based on if it's like a group of children visitors, or is it a group of researchers. And so it could be very productively used, like the fact that you can dynamically reorganize the spaces, and how to do that based on some kind of data-driven approach, like, because that is indeed like one of the biggest financiers of the metaverse, right? That the retail opportunity, and so it'll easily show up that like Amazon is not the best interface, right? Like I mean, they're using this crude interface just because it's fast. It's not easy to find the products you want, like, and you have to rely on Google, you have to rely on like Facebook, like, anytime you do shopping, you're not doing shopping only on Amazon. And that's why like Amazon pays like enormous amounts of money to Google and Facebook to drive links to Amazon. And so that's one of the key, like what Philip was saying, like it's a key infrastructure channeling people and their gaze, not only like clicking on buying, but also just looking at things. Like, so there's an economy of advertising in a way, like eyeball driven, like impression driven. So even if my camera is pointed at like a advertisement, like I'm sure like you can monetize that. And any space that maximizes or provides the maximum opportunity for impressions is a metric that will drive the economics of the spatial design. And I think all of those aspects are really brought forward by like this current team that has expended enormous energy in like being very productive, and so we can have all these conversations now. And the other important conversation, I think, is one of user-generated content, which are anchored around like these professionally created spaces, because like, there is the analogy to the current internet, because anybody can have a website, but they're also curated websites, like, and so there is that spatial analogy on the one hand, and then the other hand, like it still has to relate to the current paradigm of the internet, which is address based, and the addresses are like could be anywhere, like so there is these two aspects, I think, of the metaverse. One which is spatial and co-location and synergies. Like on the other hand, there is the current internet, which to adjacent internet addresses can host completely different things. Like so there's a dynamism of that, like which also needs to be somehow reconciled, I say.
Maybe I just could chip in. So, I mean, I think what maybe we're not haven't yet discovered the real potential of this realm. But one of the things that I would want to suggest as a possibility is that rather than simply replicating our existing world, one could look at this space as a space of experimentation, a space of, let's say, even morphogenetic possibilities. Certainly one of my FIU DDes students, Wan Yu He, is doing that. She's using machine learning to generate architectural spaces to test out things. And I think that Snow's work also, and to some extent, Daniel Bolojan's earlier PhD work on the same thing, was all about that, about testing things out in a space where you could do these things. So I don't think we've quite recognized what we can do in this space yet. And I just think to replicate our existing world is maybe a little bit short-sighted. I think there are other possibilities. I suspect they're out there.
But I think like yes, that is true. Like that we should maybe think of new performances or new performance criteria to shape and the layout and the look and feel and so on. But having said that, like we should also recognize that like our phenomenological apparatus are kind of rooted through evolution in a world, the physical world, like that there is something like the equivalent of the uncanny valley spatially, like for things to be recognizable, there is things to be relatable, like it cannot be completely alien either. Like, so there is, because our sensory apparatus is what it is, like, and like, even if you wear this headset, like you feel dizzy, because if you turn things upside down, like most people feel dizzy. And if the refresh rate is not like what we are used to in the physical world, we feel dizzy. Like, so there are some, I think, like natural limits to what this space of possibility should be constrained to.
It's not only, well, there's certainly natural limits and they can be teased out, but there's also historical limits. So if to move to something very more stranger and other, still with, of course, within the cognitive limits, it will also be, it will take time. So if you would show, somebody have to learn how to even to look at a photograph. So, or if you a contemporary commercial full of cuts and blitz illusions and densely cut and is maybe indigestible for somebody looking at coming cold from the 1940s, for instance. So there's also this. So that's why I agree with Neil that there is definitely something to be explored and to be discovered. And there is, of course, for an avant-garde condition, we can pull away from more and faster, and the art space would do it. That's what I was discussing earlier in my lecture. The role of the art space would be wise. Maybe there's metaverse art, where basically the functionality is requirements are lifted, and these art projects are financed otherwise through stimulation. They don't have to perform anything except of stimulating and being engaging, and maybe then hinting to metaverse designers who will work against performance criteria and we be influencing. So I'm interested in the question of course, what and somehow, of course, as an avant-garde design group or at university and so on, they somehow sit between what the artists would do and what you would deliver to clients. They sit in the in-between space, which is interesting. While we are still quite a little bit let's say tying us back to what might work instantly, because we are teaching this while we actually engage in commercial metaverse projects which have to function, and still that people want innovation and things, but they have to function. So it's actually quite interesting. I think there's definitely a role for loosening that pressure, and I'm sure that the university, schools of architecture and schools of art possibly will do that, whereas we have such urgent delivery requirements that we are slightly more performance focused, instant performance.
Maybe just to come, just one final comment, that I guess I've been arguing just recently that some of these humanoid robots that artists like Ada are completely absurd. I mean, why does it have to be a humanoid? Why does it have to be a robot? We know from what you've been doing with Refik that actually you can generate far better work from using DALL-E 2. So I think just to be able to get beyond that nostalgia of this kind of world in which we come from and really think through the possibilities, you know, and I think that architecture is born of constraints, but what are the constraints in this domain, you know, and how can we, so that's why I think we're still early in this venture. And I think to try and find out what is the real logic of this, it's still, we can't assume it is the logic
I mean,
of
look,
our world.
that's quite true. The engineering constraints have been fully substituted, but the social functionality constraints are virtually identical. Because what we're talking about here is we have these conferences and we have these exhibitions and trade fairs and university life and teaching, and those performances have to continue. I mean, maybe they can be even more hyper performance, but the performance constraints, social functionality constraints are there. You can loosen them, like we've done in DRL so often. We're saying form the program systems first, and later on vary which program we're addressing. So then we wouldn't have said NFT museum, we said metaverse and generate metaverse systems. And then we look at what we've got here. And then we are saying, which part of all the potential really programmatic functionality in which we might think of through the metaverse, could that be used of? So that is when usually our heuristics, in this case, we've been more specific. But yeah, so the social functionality constraints are not going to be so radically different because I'm emphasizing the continuity of social reality, which is very strong between physical spaces and virtual spaces, because it's the same corporation institutions, you know, the forms of cooperation and so on we want to get done. It's not a spectacle, a fantasy world where we don't have these constraints. And also the other thing which ties it back, I still hope, I mean, that's why that, you know, that some of this these virtual environments will be, you know, designed at the same time as physical environments for the same organizations, or that within the physical you're interfacing into the virtual, and then there will be these continuities. And I'm also curious about influencing back into the physical, more dynamism, more AI overlays, and so on. So that for me, I'm interested in the tie back, that it can be tied back, that it doesn't sever off totally. So that it's still one visual spatial culture, one style which crosses that boundary. That's still something which is on my agenda.
Just continue on that, like performance metrics, or what kind of constraints or new criteria to use to explore this space of possibility. It's increasingly, like, at least all the current metaverses from Wilder World to Sandbox, like one of the primary motivations is user density and user experience, right? Like, so we, and some of that we try to address in this workshop by like having the Unreal component, like, you know, at least you're always walking around in this 3D space you're creating and then trying to inform the design, which, I mean, of course, given the space of time, like, you know, it's not very evident, but I think that way of designing, where we put the user experience up front and central, and also derive some metrics from that user experience, like, and it's not individuated experiences anymore. It's, as Patrick said, it's social. And how do you capture any of that, like, computationally? I think is, as Neil said, like, is extremely, and also what Philip said, like, is a very important research question, and it's a very important kind of domain of innovation. Let's say, how do you capture some of these social functionalities into algorithms, which for the most part in the last 2 decades have been focused on the physical world and physical performance, like, and so I think it's a very timely and provocative question, like, which we can focus moving forward on how to capture some of these performance criteria, like even in the artistic exploration, which I think some of the generative artists are already doing. When they have to create a NFT, and if they have to sell that NFT, it has to have that user experience and novelty. which which I find quite interesting, that like even people using DALL-E and AI, Rafik even like has to rely on creating these spatial experiences to be able to sell that NFT.
Yes, I think it's really important for architects. I think the contribution to architects to the metaverse design recently, because a lot of platform is booming, especially in China. I think including MAD, they also design a metaverse interface. So I think the infrastructure system is extremely important to create new possibility for the new experience. That's maybe the designer. I think the designer's contribution is, I think it's architecture for the metaverse, which is a systematic infrastructure system. Maybe the designer can contribute. Maybe the Seaverse could be a special metaverse, create a new possibility of the experience, right? So it's interesting topic.
Patrick, you're muted.
You should move on to the second team.
Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you for
Yeah,
calling.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we move to the third team 3, please?
Yep, we are here.
Yeah, are you able to share your screen?
Yes, sure. And hello, everyone. We are team 3, and we are grouped with 4 people.
Can you make it full screen, please? I don't see.
And can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're seeing the web page, but not. Can you make it full screen?
And yeah, sure. Just 1 second. Oh my God.
The slideshow button at the top.
Oh, okay. And so maybe we can show just like this.
Yeah, the slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And yeah, and this is our precedence when we talk about the metaverse. And because in the metaverse, we cannot really touch things, and we cannot really smell. So it's more about the reaction with the items we have seen, and then we can have reaction with the screen or with the items what we see in the metaverse. And it's also about something futuristic and also something dynamic and something like very fluid. That's what we are trying to achieve in our architecture. I mean,
yeah. From this, we are moving for the next thing. These are our couple of inspiration from what our other architectural team doing. Like this is from B.R. Kingill's group, and this is ZHA core team's metaverse thing. Sprite next.
okay. And for categorizing different types of artwork, we have design and we have this, and we have the list of these all different type of artwork, like some 2D art, 3D art, and also something NFT columns, spatializing design for NFT items, and also a market space for sharing information, which we think is really important to use in metaverse. And also the transition tunnels, 3D static space, 3D anchors, and 2D art screen. Then we will jump to the module. And we have two separate parts of our design. So, and this one is about the modules which happened in the start zone. So the first one, the market space I just mentioned about, and it's more about the market for sharing information, just like the screen on above. and on the roof, and also there like this one is supposed to be an information columns flashing and around, and also showing the information about the trading history, and just like who just created new NFT items, who just buy it, and like also the blockchain and how many times and it has been sold, and how many times what's the highest price it has been given. So all information can be shared in this space, and people can go around also these information columns to see something, and like to do reaction with these columns to check the most related and the most latest information. And then this is about the 3D art for double height. So sometimes we will have something like in really large scale, so people can like walk around this circular pathway, and the 3D art is floating in the middle of the space. And this is the media space, and we can have like this large screen, and people and just sit in the front of the space, seeing some media art. And this one is for 2D art sliding screen. So for each like space, this green space, actually they are the sliding screen, and then the 2D artwork can be just projected projected on this screen and moving around. People can just go inside and get engaged with the screen, and even touch the screen, just like the president we just seen before. And this is for NFT columns. All these columns are designed for showing spatialized NFT items. So just like this artwork showing in the center of those columns. And we also have the small scale sculpture display space. So we have this kind of like sculpture and shelves. All this small scale can be displayed on the shelves along away this long sculpture. So the items itself is also part of the art. And we also have the spatial, and below is about the terrain zone. And Bala, would you like to go with this?
Yeah, so we have two zones, terrain zone and star zone. In this terrain zone, we have 4 spatial assemblies. So in that, we have this 3D static exhibits, which shows the meta beings, like the 3D static exhibits. And then we have a 3D chaos center, which focuses on the center of this exhibit, which can be an attractive point to overall exhibit, which is under the terrain part. And the interesting part here is the transition tunnel, which the meta beings will be jumping out from the sky zone, I mean the star zone, to the terrain zone. So in this this tunnel, transition tunnel will be depicting like a wormhole kind of thing, which can transfer the meta beings to the next level. So again, the next one is the 2D art screen, which will be displaying the interactive artworks, which is 2D. Next, please.
As we have 2 parts of the world, star zone and terrain zone. In the star zone, these top star kind of structures and exhibits are coming, and we also have 2 towers, which is dedicated to complete NFT. It will be displaying different artist work. So the guests who want to see those things can be viewed in that. Next, please. This is the star zone, and these are 2 those NFT towers. Yeah, go.
And okay, here start the games. So, and we start from entering from this space. So this is the market space we just mentioned about, and our people jump in this space and seeing all this information surrounded us. And all this information is about the trading history or NFT items information. So in terms of like a metaverse, when we are talking about it, it's something about decentralization and also something about the like we used to use the internet, but now it comes to the third generation of internet. So and everyone can also create art, and we also we are also the user of the internet, but we are also creating something. So all information sharing is really important for everyone in the future. So and we also have a transfer column in the center, so people can just get inside, and it will bring you up to bring you up. So we come to this space. So all this is a large scale exhibit we just talked about. So you will be hanging in it will be the center of the whole space. And here comes to the NFT columns. So and each column is supposed to show like one NFT items from artists. And this is sliding screen showing the 2D artwork. So it changes and it moves along the screen, and then just move automatically. And then we will have this big tunnel, which we can use like both this transportation way. So the one in the center is like a like a lift. And also we have this tunnel going to the below part, the terrain zone. Paula?
Yeah, so in the terrain zone, we have these are the exhibits which can be seen over here. So this contains the 3D static exhibits, and in the center we'll be having the Chaos focus point. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, so I think the same render, I guess. Next, please.
And
So
that's
Zidong,
the
yeah, the video will be Zidong.
yeah, that's
Okay,
the end of
so
the presentation.
so
We'll
I
pass to
will maybe you should end the
okay, yeah, I just ended.
so you can see my screen now. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so so I am responsible for the visualization of our design, and so in my sense of metaverse, I think it should be something very interactive, and it has the sense of flow, energy flow, data flow, and information flow, and people flow, and material flow. So I want to bring this sense of flow into the visualization of our project, and in the ideal design, we want everything movable, not just these things, but also the some part of the architecture can also be movable. But now we, due to the technology limitation, we just achieve some part of it. Here is the zoom, star zoom, and here we have a very interesting design. When we here I take a screenshot, and then we just jump down, and we can walk through a very exciting tunnel to be the terrain play places, and here is and people can sit here and have fun, chat with each other. So that is what I want to express in this project. Oh, and you can see there is still some little bugs. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. You can stop.
A few points I'm fascinating. So yeah, I do love a lot of what you're visualizing there, these ephemeral spaces, the data flow, the swarms of pixels, voxels, light and information. I mean, that's a bit what Philip was talking about. And I suspect that's part of this marketplace, which I think is a strong idea and we discussed it the other day, and that has all been generated since, and it's very striking. So I do love that. Obviously, it's just stand, and we don't know how this is information. There was also that still image where you said, I mean, the trading history, or maybe the universe of similar NFTs, suddenly surrounding up to the horizon. What wasn't clear is what the actual NFT is you might be selecting, of which there is a trading history, or which there is a kind of similar market cluster of similars, etc. So it wasn't. I mean, it's an atmosphere. That gives you a kind of glimpse of the kind of environment which might deliver that information and data flow. But obviously, we haven't gotten specifics. So look, I wouldn't demand of you to see specific. So that's been was a great progress. I really love that. And the thing is, then I had a question where I feel if you talk about display of NFT art and so on. So what I find striking is, I mean, then you had this big bench with a very small shelf with these little glowing NFTs, and somebody said, well, the bench is part of the artwork. Well, I mean, overall, I mean, what I would level the criticism at this particular later space where you have all these concentric rings, lighting, the strange funnels coming from the ground, strange funnels from the ceiling. We don't know what these are, how you engage with them. They're these kind of strange objects you're generating. Maybe that's you're just generating them. So the criticism would be, shouldn't be the works themselves be more? I mean, that's often been leveled to let's say if you make a museum too busy with all its forms, you hardly can, see the work, you distinguish the works of art. They get kind of lost in all the over-articulation of the surroundings. Whereas there's a reason why, and oftentimes you get the white cube concept, or maybe it actually would be even better, a white cube, not a white cube, a white spherical, where also the corners disappear and you have the works themselves glowing and being focused on and framed, and maybe the group of people relating to the works, and let's say not all these chandeliers and highly decorated environments. So that's so also that space where you have that big artwork. I mean, look, there's compared to previous. I mean, it was more anti-gravity and not welded to the ground floor, single plane like. So there's a lot of advance. The spatiality, three-dimensionality is used beautifully, but there's this over-articulation which remains kind of unexplained. And I was wondering, I had the question, when you had this big floating artwork, was that ramp part of the artwork, or was the ramp meant to be you moving around the artwork? So that was the question. And if that ramp was not part of the artwork, I would question that it maybe starts to interfere with the experience of the artwork more than it facilitates the experience. I mean, look, it's a bit maybe nitpicking. It's a bit, but I think it's reminded me of, we developed the one museum concept where we were inspired by the work of let's say that would be the anti-model. You have that over-articulation, which is basically like a Baroque, a palace space in which you place artworks, and it's going to be hard to find, you know, separating figure from background. And you know, if you know the work of James Turrell, The Magic of Jittering Space, which disappears background, and only you have people floating in you know, that was a vision that we once tried with an art gallery, where we take out all the corners and wash the light away. That there's no background, and that's in a physical space, but in the metaverse, you obviously can do more of that. And so I think there is a kind of strange busyness. So for which, you know, which would be it looks more like a science fiction set where you have narratives. You know, maybe that's where they're incubating the slave robots. The remainders of the human race. Sorry, that may be too frivolous, but I do think there is an element of over articulation, although some of the visuals are absolutely stunning, and particularly where a lot of this is this kind of swarm dematerialized framing and displaying and information delivery, where you don't need kind of hosting surfaces. You know, everything can be, and if you still have gravity and for orientation, you don't need so many hosting surfaces, which I like in some of the visuals. And in another visuals, there's too many hosting surfaces, or surfaces which we don't know what they're for.
Okay, I think it's a really impressive representation on the phenomenological space in the metaverse. I think which based on the flow of, as I mentioned, the energy and also the connection between different agency. I think that is interesting to implement this kind of connections, correlations, or some space connections. I think it's interesting. The question for the details of design, I think, firstly, I think who is this design? The stakeholders you are working, it's like you have special client, or that's an artist, or maybe it's a gallery. So the most important, I think, for the users in the metaverse is actually they would like first to have a game rules to define how to define the space firstly, and how to represent the object they want to present. Maybe the artists, some of them, they want to present like the canvas, two-dimensional artworks, and some of them three-dimensional artworks, and maybe the videos or the films probably. And at the same time, I think the human being, when they enter into the metaverse, they would like to firstly find some similarity to the physical space. So I think all the platform right now is cannot they will have certain kind of style, which are very similar. Could be either like voxel, crystal voxel, that is like a voxel based space, and the decentralized, which is based on this kind of triangular space, triangular mesh, which can define certain kind of mesh surface. So both of them have some stylistic definition of the space. I mean, this kind of fundamental geometrical definition of space will guiding the users to certain kind of experience. So, I mean, is there any potential creativity or imagination in this design can not only focus on the stakeholders, but also, I think, the community, the connections or the swarm intelligence based on different agencies. I think that is probably should be a very interesting networks to address all the users, how they can make communication to each other. And I think it's still, I will mention the infrastructure. I think the designers maybe not just design a single building or single object, but you should design a city. The metaverse is like a city. And it should be have a multi-dimensional possibility for people how to enter into it and how to communicate with the other peoples. So I think that should be stylistic based on certain kind of geometry system, because all the metaverse interface or the platform should be based on certain technology. And they should make the surface as small as possible, small numbers as possible, to make it more efficient for the efficiency of connection and to communicate with other people. So I think the NFT museum or the metaverse is not just present a space, but they should present a communication. They should present the kind of connection to the others. So, I mean, from this perspective, I think would you like to introduce more about how to create a public space, or how to create this kind of infrastructure space in your design? Could you adding something to that? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's something more about the connection between people, between users.
Yeah, I think, yeah, picking up on that, like, I mean, one of the, let's say, social use scenarios that you could consider, I mean, again, like, there's a lot of progress from Thursday. So, you know, all conversation is based on like the prolific amount of work that all teams have done, or both teams. So the criticism is only conversational to see what we can do collectively next. So one of the things that, like, you know, your presentation kind of provoked, one of the thoughts was within NFTs, in the current culture of NFTs, you know, whether it's an airdrop or there's like an auctioning, that's a very deeply social activity or scene on the one hand, but it's also driven by a lot of data, right? Like, you know, like you want to, when you're bidding, like most people are on their phone, like looking at like other NFTs and like, you know, how the price history of like the artists and who they're bidding against, even if they're anonymous. So there's this like kind of spectacle, like of a traditional auction, like of like, you know, it's a very charged environment, like but at the same time there's also like something like investing in stocks type of background to NFT airdrop. So maybe you could identify like these kind of scenarios, like individual stages of like how NFTs are created. Like, so there is also the artist community that you can design for. Like, there's a lot of, you know, currently people are using Twitter and you know, cloud, the sound spaces, and like, so you can create these kind of social spaces that are part of that culture of around NFTs, like the auctions, the airdrops, like the creation, and then also like the display and the enjoyment within as a social activity. So I think in all of these, there are different kinds of information that needs to be displayed, like or people want to access. And so that could be like, you know, the further evolution of the project is, you know, further differentiation in terms of the spaces and the information that needs to be displayed there, and so on. But like, yeah, like, I think it's a very important topic that you've kind of discovered and articulated, the idea of the NFT marketplace, how it can be spatially demonstrating a spatial use or design for the marketplace, not just this 2D pixels.
I have one question. Can I ask?
Of course.
Yeah. Actually, Vishu was teaching us. He was saying this metaverse platform is being used more as a stimulator to real world things. Like how you all see metaverse. Like, is it we need to build something which is going to be on real world, or else it can be something else, like out of something which can't be built in real world or such thing.
Yeah, maybe it relates.
Perspective, it doesn't need to be buildable necessarily in the real world, but probably if you have certain, I mean, as I said earlier, you don't need gravity, but you need some kind of configuring of an event. So let's say you come in and there is an opening, exhibition opening. You need to build kind of a structure of sequencing and curating and clustering those artworks. But there will also be a social group. Let's say there's an opening, the curator steps forward and says something, he steps up on the stage, there's a gathering. There is maybe, or you let an artist present, and then there's a situation of having a little tour or educational. So you need kind of props and distinctions and structurations of the social diagram, whether this is a confrontational or around in a seminar configuration, or it's more fluid, like in a workshop, shifting between different groups. But they might need props. You might still want to have props to hook onto, rather than being. And I mean, it was interesting in for instance, you look at Horizon, Microsoft, Facebook, Meta Horizon workspaces. They have tables and desktops and meeting tables, and none of these tables have legs, nor do the avatars have any legs. So everything is kind of floating, but the rest is very realistic in terms of using very stereotypical environments to encode for what would be a kind of 21st century office room look like, and meeting room, and so on and so forth. So it's quite curious. So you can't build these, but there's a lot of connotation and information. So that would be. But I think you cut yourself loose a little bit further from this very stereotypical Microsoft. And what I sometimes feel is that strangely these legs actually would be helpful to orient, plug everything back to a continuous reference surface, so you know where they are. Unless you know if it's a high, low, or coffee table. If it's just floating without legs, you don't know. Is it in the perspective? Is it a tall table far away or a lower table closer by? And the similar things I thought, let's say if you had this elevator in your thing, and it seems like, okay, why do you have to prescribe that path? Why can't people not fly freely? There's even that platform. It's just that orientation, again, understanding and reducing complexity of possibilities to channel more. So if for instance, a bit like also making sure that people encounter each other and predict each other, find each other. If you go to a shopping mall, let's say an airport, I don't like it. Let's say you have this meandering path, or you lay out a path system which makes sure that footfall concentrates in certain points. That means you also constrain for the purposes of social engagement. And I've learned that from space syntax when we do the campus design. It's not of maximizing paths, so do the quickest from everywhere to everywhere, actually taking out a lot of paths so that you generate urbanity, and you constrain so that you generate encounter possibilities rather than have total dispersal. So if you had an unconstrained, so the lift is then in the end actually a good opportunity to communicate, because a few people want to go to this place, they actually have to wait for the lift to come back. There's the talk, they're in the lift, rather than everybody flying wherever they want in a straight line, as if you would telecommunicate. It's nearly as bad as teleporting to everywhere. The whole point of the thing is lost. So I'm not saying that you need, and that elevator is not buildable, because you quite rightly didn't give it a structure, nor did you give it a cable. There's no point in modeling the cable, but you modeled the space as some kind of contained space for particular circulation effort. And look, maybe you've been too literal with that, but that's the kind of reason and the kind of consideration, social functionality considerations, which bring us, let us start with let's say more familiar conditions. And I think again we will work away from that quite surely, but I don't think we will work away from that just the spectacle of unconstrained creation, because that it's not unconstrained, it's social functionality constrained. So And buildability is certainly not a requirement, but in the reflecting on columns, also we have these urban metaverses where the towers are starting to float. In perspective, you actually don't know where they are. So that ground, do we need the ground? I mean, you've denied it. Do we need any ground surface at all in a metaverse city? I mean, it's a good question, but I think it's again about concentration. If you could be anywhere in space, you could be the dispersal. Let's say we start losing the ground if we have so much foot traffic. I mean, it's also historically, if you have millions of people in the metaverse, then it becomes over congested. But if you have only very few, then it's better to lock them not only to the ground, to lock them onto certain channels and spots. So that's the kind of thinking we have to get into, rather than saying how wonderful it is that we have no constraints, and aren't you stupid to still have any residue of familiarity or analogy with physical spaces because you don't need to. I think that's, I mean, I understand it's a good challenge as well to have. I mean, I've had it, and so as you can notice that we've been challenged in various ways to do, and we thought it through, and we've come to some kind of answer to this, that this would be a historical process of working away and emancipating away from these analogies.
Could I throw a small comment in here? I'm sort of part of this workshop as an observer. So right now the metaverse is kind of a semiological experience, which is highly visual. And related to what Philip said about the multidimensional aspect of the metaverse, I would like to refer to something that I'm going to call cinematic vision. So right now, our vision in the metaverse is largely tied to following an avatar that represents us, and we see everything in first person. But there is also, I think, a trajectory of evolution that could look at throwing our ability to view things. So seeing things from multiple directions at once, or having a drone view or kind of a sweeping motion that is not necessarily just tied to the avatar, but something that we can see in multiple dimensions at once. Maybe that would be, kind of splitting the screen or something like that. But I think that ability to experience things from many directions, and for many people in a group to be able to do that, would be a very useful architectural design tool, first of all, but also a tool to design the metaverse. That's really what I wanted to throw in there.
I think some of that, it is indeed like an interesting opportunity to think of like the computational or technological counterparts to that. How do we think about this kind of multiple viewpoints, and how the multiple viewpoints inform the synthesis of the spaces and the experiences. One such kind of crude current primitive is design of stadiums, right? Like it is designed from, it's not one person being in different places, but it's like thousands of people being in individually specific places in a stadium. So there is a set of abstractions born out of such a arrangement, like things like the A value or the cross-sectional design of a stadium, or like that. And also like from every seat, like now increasingly, like particularly in American sports, like you need to be able to see not only the physical pitch, like, but also the screen, like that is displaying a lot of information. And usually they're on two opposite ends of the stadium. And now add on to that, like people are also watching for stuff on their phones, like even in a physical stadium, like because they cannot like see a replay, or they cannot see like the ball in detail, they cannot see the data analytics overlaid. So there are multiple screens that are actually being used in sports events, and also with I saw like a prototype of social engagement in live concerts, in music concerts. Like, so people are forming these communities of attendees, like no matter where they are in the stadium, like they're still in the virtual space, they're together. And so yeah, there could be these productive applications of like the multiple viewpoint opportunity to both enhance the experience, but also inform the design of the spaces.
Yeah, I really like that idea. It's quite powerful. I mean, obviously the cognitive limitations, what you pay attention to it in time, but it's a bit like we have some of this fly-throughs we run in the bottom right corner often, let's say. I mean, you've seen that a little bit of a red dot where you are at any time, and you can increase that and maybe there's a third perspective which where the overall orientation is simultaneously given with the close-up. I mean, there is obviously limited, I mean, there's an attention economy, and so that's where, let's say, what Shai was talking about earlier, let's say, natural cognitive psychological limits of comprehension and attention distribution. But I like your example of the football stadium where you have you have to keep scanning and switching between big screen and looking at the field and maybe your phone even. So yeah, I really love the idea. I mean, it's interesting to explore how can one make that, because you definitely run against limits of that being productive. There's potentially something where you can train yourself up, but to work with that and say, hey, that's an idea. Multiple viewpoints are at play simultaneously. How would one integrate them in ways which would be more conducive to the cognitive, to not running into cognitive limitations here? That's a really nice idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think I have something to add. I think my team actually, we recently we're interested in the we make a lot of research on the metaverse and different platforms. We engage a lot to different platforms. I think most urgent for recently is for the architect is not just design for some client in different metaverse, but it's really meaningful to define how to play with or how to set up a community, a society, which designed by the good architect. I think it's not just a game player, but we should change to be some stakeholder to set up community for the metaverse. I think this year, 2 days ago, 5 of my former students, they graduated from UCLA, from coming back to Shanghai. They just set up a new group. The name is Topo Voxel. That is very interesting designers-based platform, which is really friendly used by the architect, and you can design some very interesting space and actually they already invite a lot of the users, and most of them are the designers' background. I think that's a meaningful test for some young generation. Actually, you do not just imagine what kind of possibility, but also you should think about the infrastructure system which designers can contribute. This first. Secondly, I think it's meaningful because NFT produce a lot of opportunity for the new NFT artworks, which is already 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. They can design, for example, the furniture, which is like a family-based form, which is you put them NFT with different numbers which just based on different the distributed blockchain with every furniture. So, for example, 1 second you can have 2,000 furnitures coming out, but actually we need some connection to, we name it a metaverse printer. If we can set up some physical space and the virtual space connection. That's the connection between the NFT creativity or artworks to the physical space transformation. I think that is also very interesting in the future, because when the young generation, they have certain kind of community and make a lot of creative works inside the NFT networks. They also need some connection in the offline space to set up certain kind of connection to this metaverse. So I think that's also a very interesting connection. Probably the designers should think about how to make this kind of transformation possible. So that's also a very interesting opportunity for the future designers. You need to think about how to transfer the creativity, transfer this kind of blockchain NFT artworks to connect to the physical world, to the physical, like offline galleries. I think that's probably a very interesting topic we recently discussed. Because yesterday we have another metaverse groups just make the final review. And I think all the critics are very young, like in their 20s, this young generation. They have the very interesting ideas and talk about what is NFT and what is the new game rules. They can share with other people. So I think it's really a pleasure to see the two groups today. I think which is really interesting to show us the new definition, imagination in the metaverse, architecture in the metaverse. Thank you for that.
I want to add one very important thing, which I don't think we consider because there's such an overwhelming abundance of NFTs that are artworks and visual things. It's very important to remember that an NFT is basically a smart contract on blockchain, which can represent just about anything or groups of things and can be configured in the same way that you would configure any contract, except that it becomes immutable on the blockchain. So there are a great many NFTs that are actually physical. There are even people that are fractionalizing real estate on blockchain so that you can make the commodity of real estate liquid and can trade it like a security. So the exploration of what an NFT is, I mean, the artwork that is emerging, mostly like the very cartoonish early artwork, what's valuable about it is actually not the art itself, but the investigation that was going on behind the scenes on blockchain about creating an economy around NFTs, about this tradability, a secondary market, etc. So I think it's important to remember that an NFT is just kind of a market and legal device, and we can literally apply it to anything, both virtual and real.
Philip, I mean, I like what you talked about on this guy's TopoVoxel. I would like to look at what they're up to. I mean, what is exciting about this space, there's a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurship, opening up your own idea of a metaverse, maybe a niche one particular, or developing tools for generating metaverses as well. I'm not sure if that's what TopoVoxel is, but in this world of developing, design systems we've been talking about so many times. I mean, this idea of facilitating more user-generated content. Many of these metaverses have these in-world builders, and that's interesting. I mean, that's Shajay's domain of thinking through, configurators and module-based worlds, which are simple design worlds